Now, in a small meeting room in central London, a group of little-known men and women are meeting right now to make a decision about the future regulation of the press. The Press Recognition Panel was established following the newspaper hacking scandal, which led to the closure of the News of the World in 2011. At the heart of all this is the question of how much should our press be regulated in a free society. In 2011, following the phone hacking scandal, David Cameron set up the Leveson inquiry to examine the culture, ethics and behaviour of the press. Following Lord Leveson's recommendations, the government enacted a royal charter, which in turn set up a press recognition panel to choose a new press watchdog. The terms of the royal charter cannot be changed unless agreed by a 2/3 majority in both Houses of Parliament. So far, only one organisation called Impress has applied to become the new watchdog. It has the backing of privacy campaigner Max Mosley and the author J.K. Rowling, amongst others. Most of the big newspapers are opposed to what they see as state regulation of the press and instead set up their own rival regulator called IPSO, which won't apply to be the officially recognised press regulator. There's a lot at stake. If Impress is approved by the Press Recognition Panel today, Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act could be triggered, which means any publishers which don't sign up to Impress would be forced to pay the legal costs of libel actions brought against them, even if they win the case. Newspapers, including The Sun and the Daily Mail, say this is an affront to democracy and will encourage spurious claims. Campaigners say Section 40 will ensure newspapers are properly regulated and respect people's privacy. Well, we've been joined by Max Mosley, the former head of Formula One, who has been campaigning for more stringent regulation of the press since the News of the World published stories about his sex life. He later won a privacy court case against the newspaper. And Neil Wallis is also here. He's a former deputy editor of the News of the World. Welcome to both of you. First of all, to you. We understand that the government isn't intending to implement legislation that would make the press liable for libel costs, that it's going to be kicked into the long grass. Are you disappointed about that?
Well, if that happens, I will be disappointed, because the point of the whole thing is that at the moment, if you're the victim of a libel or breach of privacy, harassment, all those sort of things, if you want to sue the newspaper, you've got to be very rich, because you've got to be able to risk £1 million. Now, very few people can do that. So the rest of the population, more than 99%, are left with no recourse. And the point of all this legislation is that there would then be the proper recognised regulator would have an arbitral system, which the papers could use and the individual could use, and it would give access to justice. It is all about access to justice. Without
that stick, if you like, or without the ability to call on what is called Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act, do you think the regulator is finished before it's even started?
Oh no, I don't think so, because the thing is that even if the government decide they don't want to implement Section 40, they're going to have to come up with something. You can't leave 99% of the population with absolutely no redress if they're traduced by the press. Just can't.
Right. And in that case, what's wrong with the idea of Impress? There is already your own regulator, IPSO. So what's wrong with Impress?
Well, there's two issues, really. Is the inadequacies of Impress. It's a politically driven, axe-grinding farce.
Why?
Well, I'm happy to come on to that.
That's nonsense.
And secondly, there's the background to Impress. Impress is the wholly bought property of Max. Max is bankrolling.
Well, let him answer. Are you not bankrolling?
This is fantasy.
Right.
I'm bankrolling a charity which exists to bankroll a Leveson compliant.
Let him finish, and then you can come back.
A Leveson compliant regulator. Could be IPSO, could be anybody. That's what I'm bankrolling, and they decide which potential regulator they're going to...
So it's not quite true to say that Max Mosley is bankrolling this particular group, because he would be, as he say, funding any regulator that is then chosen by this independent panel. That's true.
It's all sophistry. What's the truth of the matter?
That's the fact.
The truth of the matter is that Max set up something called, I think, the Independent Press Regulation Trust, and that is bankrolling Impress, which is a bunch of like-minded, hacked-off anti-press campaigns to the tune of just under £1 million for 4 years. He is the sole or one of the very few, and certainly the major provider of funds for Impress. Now, the significance of that is this. If Impress is set up...
Well, it is set up. It's whether it's going to be appointed as the official regulator.
Yeah. Max, as in the contract that I've seen and has been published, can withdraw funding from it at 10 days' notice. Now, the vital essence of the need for a press regulator is for that to be independent.
Right, but why isn't it independent if it's being chosen by an independent panel?
Because he's paying for it. It's his.
Right.
It's his.
Are you saying that Max Mosley is bribing the independent recognition panel?
No, that's a more complex issue about how the funding of the press recognition panel works.
But
the significance is this. The significance of this is when Lord Leveson called for an independent regulator, he said a couple of things that were absolutely essential. He said a new system of regulation should not be considered sufficiently effective if it does not cover all significant news publishers. Impress has approximately 60 hyperlight local. Nobody.
The suggestion that I'm doing all of that. You've had your turn.
Yes, you answer the claim that you are somehow behind all this and therefore fix it, and then we'll come on to the support.
Okay. What it's all about is access to justice. The only thing that matters to me is that people should have access to justice, and you have not. Ipso, for a start, is completely owned, completely controlled, completely paid for by the major newspapers. That really is controlled. In this case, we've got a person giving to a charity, which in turn gives to a charity.
What else does the charity...
Hang on, Neil.
Don't interrupt. You've had your say. Now let me have mine. This is done by an independent body, and the Impress has got all independent people. The charity in between IPRT, I don't even know two of the three trustees. It's just such nonsense. Impress is completely independent, and I fund a charity which funds Impress.
Right.
But in the case of Ipso, it's all paid for by the major newspapers, and they can cut it off, fire Moses, do whatever they like at a moment's notice.
Right, hang on, Neil. Let me ask the question. It is true, it has been set up by news proprietors. So when you are criticising Max Mosley for his role in terms of Impress, it is also true to say that Ipso was set up by newspaper proprietors to be a self-regulator. So this is something that you could argue, in terms of sophistry, that is being run and funded by newspapers.
Well, pardon me, it is being run by newspapers. It's not been run by newspapers. Certainly the finances and the people who are investing in it, as it were, include the Bury Times, the Camborne Packet, the Newcastle Chronicle. 90% of newspapers in this country are members of Ipso. 90%.
And let me put that to you, because that is a problem,
major
isn't it?
publication.
He won't let you put anything in.
Let me put the question, because one of the biggest problems is about trust in the regulator that is set up. People will question the trust they might have in Ipso because it's run and set by newspapers themselves. But Impress doesn't have enough support, does it, from major contributors or newspapers or publications? It's very, very small. So how are you going to command the trust of people like Neil Wallis?
Well, the complaint of the major newspapers is that if Impress is recognised, they will be under a lot of pressure to join it, because then they get the benefit of the independent arbitration that works for both sides. Plus, they have all the benefits for the smaller press, who at the moment aren't properly protected.
Right,
Small
because you are
newspapers
representing...
will die if this goes ahead.
It's just nonsense.
Why?
Well,
Why will they die?
Very simple, very simple. If you work for a small local newspapers, and the vast majority, hundreds upon hundreds of local newspapers in this country, it is already a dreadful thing if you are sued for libel, whether you win or not, because it's immensely expensive. So the problem is, if you bring this in and you bring in Section 40, somebody can spuriously bring a libel action, and
the whole point.
This
is the whole point.
Right.
This is the
The
point.
newspaper
now, just a
pays.
second. You've had your say.
You've got to try to be honest.
Hang on.
Try honesty.
No, honesty.
Max.
Talk about honesty. You work for the News of the World. You must be joking.
Right. Hang on a second.
The reason is that when the small newspapers, if one of the small newspapers at the moment upsets somebody rich in the neighbourhood, they can be sued. Now, and they put them out of business. Under Impress and under the regulator, when you have cheap arbitration, that same local newspaper can defend itself against a rich individual, because if he loses the case, if he win or lose, he's going to pay all the costs.
What is it you're frightened of, though, Neil Wallis? Because in a sense, you've been given a choice. You know, the viewers have to remember that this was agreed by MPs. This was passed in the Houses of Parliament, and there is now a choice for newspapers to sign up to Impress. Let's say they become the recognised regulator, and then you don't pay or get landed with punitive costs if you win a case that's brought against you. Surely that's a fair choice.
Well, no. If you win a libel action under this scheme, you pay both sides of the libel action.
Not if you've signed up to the official regulator.
But the point is that this is...
So there's a choice. You just don't want to do either.
No, what happens here is the press recognition panel is appointed by the government. The government, therefore, the state is deciding
we'll overlook that. It's not true.
Who they recognise. What you are having here is the state interfering with a free press. A free press has been there for 320 years, and the result of this will be...
Yes, but we had Leveson, haven't we? We have had Leveson.
And the world has moved on.
And the world has changed.
And the government has decided, the last government decided it was not going to enforce this.
Right. I mean, there is a problem here, isn't there, Kulveer? There is a dilemma now facing the government. If they recognise Impress, then the onus is going to be on these newspapers who set up their own regulator, Ipso, to sign up. And if they don't sign up, then they are going to be liable for costs that they say are draconian, even if they win a case that is brought against them on libel, for example.
Yes, I think there's a fundamental problem. It's passionately displayed by the debate that Max and Neil are having here, because it's about trust and it's about influence. And, you know, I'm all for the great British free press. It's a bastion. It serves as a beacon to the world in terms of what it's...
And will it no longer be free, then, with this?
Well, I think the trust issue has been shaken by what we've seen that's happened in the press over recent years. Leveson tried to address that. And now it's a case of independence and regulation. And I think both sides have challenges of independence because of where the influence and where the funding comes from. So I think we need to iron out, the government needs to iron that out in how it looks to establish
Except it may do that by not actually committing to Impress, or certainly Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act. We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen, but thank you very much.